Without American leadership, I think it will be difficult for the Europeans. After all, we have to understand that if the Americans were the first to impose sanctions on the likes of Orban or Fico, it would send a signal that going against America, getting into confrontation and saying that we support some pro-Russian initiative here is not worth it. Because after all, the Americans hold the leadership position. And it seems to me, unfortunately, that the way these negotiations started in general, from the very beginning, they started in such a way that there were supposedly some boundaries on which the US was ready to make concessions. That is, the possible lifting of sanctions, as the media later wrote, even the complete lifting of sanctions starting from 2014, which were imposed against Putin and Russia for the annexation of Crimea, and so on. So there are questions. Meanwhile, by the way, Peskov, again, there's a comment from him for Araya Novosti, once again by phone. That's his usual style. Without video connection, he said that negotiations remain relevant. The Russian delegation will be waiting for the Ukrainian one in Istanbul on Thursday, and Putin has several phone calls scheduled. The Kremlin will inform if contacts between Putin and Brazilian President Lula da Silva are agreed upon. In other words, they're keeping the intrigue going until the very end. Well, I think that's just their style, actually. What's happening and the way they're acting is really interesting. And by the way, friends, who's watching us right now? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please take a moment to write in the live chat and share your honest opinions about how you think this situation will turn out. What do you believe will happen next, and why? Don't hesitate to be open and detailed in your responses. We're genuinely interested in your perspective. By the way, we've just received another comment, a fresh comment, in fact, for RBC Ukraine from the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Kirilo Budanov. He hasn't made any statements for a long time. And now he has commented on the possible meeting between Zelensky and Putin in Turkey. This is his quote. Obviously, this is an absolutely correct position taken by the Ukrainian president, who in this way demonstrates a genuine desire and readiness to end the war. We need an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire, first and foremost to save the lives of our people. I have no doubt that Volodymyr Zelensky is fully prepared for such a meeting and cooperation with our partners. We can achieve the desired result. Well, that's optimistic regarding the desired result. The only question is when. I just don't think that after this meeting, despite the fact that Turkey is doing a great deal of work there right now, Hakan Fidan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was the head of Turkish intelligence for a long time, is carrying out diplomatic work there. There was information that Andriy Sibiha has already arrived in Antalya, where the informal meeting of NATO foreign ministers is taking place. I think it's useful to coordinate our position with our partners regarding NATO, but that's the optimistic comment. The military are also talking about a ceasefire. Just last week, the head of the main intelligence directorate and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Syrskyi, spoke out and said that we are ready for any scenario, including, of course, a ceasefire. So, undoubtedly, from all sides, one could say Ukraine is declaring its position. But there is a fundamentally important point. Do you understand what the issue is? The problem, it seems to me, is that people see Putin as an enemy. They are wary of him, they are afraid of him, and in the West, everyone perfectly understands what threats come from Russia. But at the same time, it seems that, apart from the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, there is no one else who is ready to get involved to such an extent and say, we are ready to resist, we are ready to meet, we are ready to do something. That, it seems to me, is the problem. Everyone is ready for some kind of contact, for dialogue, but not to actually put pressure on Putin. That is the problem today.
I think that, in fact, this pressure has been applied. Let me repeat once again what Lula publicly stated to Putin. This was not said behind closed doors. He publicly stated that he believes Putin needs to meet. That is pressure. The fact that she said they wanted just peace. China has been clear about this. You have to read between the lines. Chinese logic and diplomacy are very complicated for people who don't really want to bother with it. But when China says something, you have to read it very, very carefully. So when China says they want a just peace, that doesn't mean it's a just peace according to our understanding, the Ukrainian or European one. No, it's the Chinese way. And what does a just peace mean in the Chinese sense? That means taking Russia's interests into account, including, in other words, accommodating Putin's wishes as he lays claim to parts of Ukrainian regions. On the one hand, China says, no, we do not recognize Crimea or other territories as Russian. But on the other hand, de facto, well, we recognize it. We understand that if Russia controls it, then de facto it should be left to them. De jure, no, we do not recognize it, but de facto let it be. At the same time, China says that one should exercise restraint. You shouldn't demand what you don't control. If Russia does not control most of the regions it claims, at least Kherson and Zaporizhia, then it cannot have them. So it should be satisfied with the status quo.
Okay, look. Well, China, everyone is putting on pressure. But for now, these are just elements of political pressure. I mean, this is what they're telling Putin. They pressured Putin not to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The German chancellor flew to see him. The French president flew to see him. They conveyed this to him. Biden, the then president of the United States, held briefings and said, don't do this repeatedly because you will face consequences. He had already heard all of this. He had already been through it. And yet he went ahead. He got bogged down in the war. He started a war, the scenario of which he had imagined differently. We understand that. A quick, victorious war that has dragged on for him into a prolonged confrontation, a difficult confrontation both for the Russian army, which is being destroyed by Ukrainian defense forces, and for the Russian economy, and for many other reasons. But he is already caught up in this process. And now, once again, things are going in circles. They tell him, stop, halt. Otherwise, and we keep hearing this, otherwise, practically since March. Yes, Lula has joined in. Yes, perhaps Xi Jinping said something as well when he came to visit him for the parade. But the feeling is, just like what Putin said the day before, yes, he said that, well, there will be sanctions, but that's not a big deal. We need to prepare for the Russian economy.
That's what he said. Of course, he wants to give everyone the impression that he has everything under control, that he's got it all covered, that he knows everything and is prepared for anything. But that's a lie. Putin knows how to lie. He knows how to, let's say, put on a brave face when things are going badly for him. And the Russian economy is facing more and more serious problems. That's what economists are saying, and moreover, these problems will only keep growing more and further still. And for him, the key task now is figuring out how to escape this trap. The situation on the battlefield is also not turning out in Putin's favor. Despite the fact that they have a superior amount of manpower and equipment, both manpower and equipment, they are not achieving any particularly significant results. They don't have any major successes that he could boast about and claim that they will end this war where he had planned to. He had planned to end this war at Ukraine's western borders. And even reaching the Dnipro, they only managed to do that in the first weeks of the war. And after that, the whole project ended there. Moreover, he was driven out from the right bank where he had been in the Kherson region. So that's how it is. And that's why for him, the current situation with a possible freeze, maybe he doesn't see it as the best scenario, but it's an acceptable one, you know. Well, let's say, relatively speaking, it's an acceptable risk. A risk, that is, he thinks that, well, under certain conditions, it can be done. Again, no one is saying that Putin will agree to a complete end to the war. If there's a ceasefire for 30 days, 60 days, 90 or whatever, that doesn't mean the war will be over. No, it won't be over. Martial law will not be lifted. That's clear as well. We could remain in this situation for months, even for a year, with a series of these, ceasefires. Well, we've already experienced, so to speak, a one-day ceasefire for Easter, then a 3-day one for May 9th, and there could be a 30-day one, and after that, maybe another. But the war hasn't ended. Well, it hasn't ended. Just like he never really stopped firing. It was clear that these were just words. And that's why the risk of this war turning into a second ATO does exist. Ukrainian generals have warned about this. We've said more than once that such a risk is possible. That's it, because the ATO, on the one hand, is a low-intensity conflict, but on the other hand, it's still a military conflict, so to speak, that can drag on for months and years. Remember 2014, 2022? That was the ATO when every week there were shellings and casualties, both among civilians and the military.
Exactly. But I just have a question. Is it logical for Putin, if he is conducting offensive operations, to agree to a ceasefire in the summer when the weather conditions are more favorable for conducting military actions? And here, by the way, is a statement from Andriy Kovalenko, the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council. He wrote that Russia plans to continue its offensive throughout the summer and will try to stall and talk everyone to death. They also want to use the front line, just as they have since 2015, as a tool for manipulation. It is important now not to give them the opportunity to manipulate the dialogue and to preserve our ability to conduct offensive actions. The price must become extremely high. By the way, here Andriy Kovalenko is hinting at the year 2015. What kind of war, what stage of the war began then, but at the same time he says that Russia is preparing to continue its offensive. Well, now it is clear that they are focusing directly on the east. It's noticeable. There in the Donetsk region will be the point of their constant pressure. The goal, of course, well, first of all, as I see it, is military propagandistic. What they are doing is trying to directly reach the borders with the Dnipropetrovsk region. Obviously, they want to use this to demoralize us, and for their own side, to boost morale by saying, oh, look at us. Oh, we can do this here, you see. We succeeded there, and we'll keep going, and the war will spread. That's obvious. It's a method of pressure. But actually, for some reason, I feel that in reality, Putin will be ready to agree to end the war, let's say to halt hostilities and enter into a more long-term truce, something lasting 30 days or more, precisely when he sees the results of the summer campaign. For some reason, it seems to me that he is convinced that in the summer, Russian troops are capable of achieving some additional results. Near Pokrovsk, in the Lyman direction, we're not talking about capturing the left bank of Ukraine or anything like that. Russia is currently incapable of that, but to achieve these kinds of tactical victories and then already and until then to drag out time, to keep dragging it out, pretending that they are in a negotiation process, just imitating it. For some reason, it seems to me that unless there really is, unless they see that the moment is already approaching when those 500% will be voted on by the American Congress, because it's also a matter of getting Congress to vote in order to lift these sanctions. Then another vote is needed. All of this drags out the timeline, and will there be enough votes? And maybe they won't want to.
But there will be voices, because American senators and congressmen have important midterm elections coming up soon, and of course they're already thinking about them anyway. And it's clear that public opinion in the US will change, because even though Russia has, let's say, managed to tire out a portion of American voters to some extent, it still remains one of the key enemies of the United States. After China, of course, but still. That's it. And that's why I think, well, look, if we look at the military situation, the situation near Pokrovsk, the situation near Kupiansk, the situation near Lyman and near Kupiansk, the Russians have been trying to advance since 2023. So this offensive has been going on for 2 years already. And where are the results? Neither Lyman nor Kupiansk are under their control. Yes, the fighting continues. The battles are very fierce, but nevertheless, they are still battles. In no part of the front have the Russians managed to enter the territory of these settlements, even though they predicted they would be able to capture Kupiansk back in the summer of 2023. That did not happen. The same story applies to Pokrovsk. They have been carrying out this offensive for over a year now. Despite some advances they do not control, they have not entered this city. For them, symbolic results or achievements are important right now. Why is it so important for them now to advance at least a few hundred meters into the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region? Because then they can claim that now, in the 4th year of the full-scale invasion, the so-called special military operation, they have entered the territory of yet another Ukrainian region. In other words, they have entered the territory of Dnipropetrovsk, where they have never been before. That is why, for them, this war has long since turned into a war of symbols. And that's why I don't think that Putin, despite the fact that he wants to, of course, he dreams of a result. I don't think he actually believes they will be able to achieve any significant progress on the front during the summer campaign. All these hopes already existed in 2023 and in 2024. And relatively speaking, everywhere this result was achieved at enormous cost for the Russians, and it was very, very modest, let's say.
Well, okay, I understand that. And I agree here regarding the assessment of the military situation, but from the perspective of the process. That is, as long as the war continues, this process continues, and Russia constantly says that they are being threatened, that there are enemies everywhere. We are confronting NATO, so it's something like a national idea. And what could make them stop thinking about this national idea except, well, probably such economic problems that would almost lead to famine? And in addition, I think there is another factor. By the way, there's a good point that just came up in our chat from Olha Martinovic, who said that the desired result will be achieved when Budanov and Malyuk keep burning oil refineries in Russia. Well, I would say not just oil refineries, but also military industrial facilities and other important sites for the Russian war economy. But of course, this requires resources, it takes time. It's not as easy as it might seem. This is difficult, painstaking work carried out by our defense and security forces units, and we are incredibly grateful to them for it. And of course, strikes on enemy territory must continue. But the point is that Putin has become so deeply involved, so absorbed by the idea that the empire must be restored. And that makes sense. It seems to me that he is already like a dictator, especially since he has been in office for a very long time. He probably feels some kind of historical destiny, some sort of mission. And he's obsessed with these ideas. He's already fixated on them. And so, okay, let's say he stops this. Is he ready? Is he even capable of stopping? That is, it's very hard for him to get out of the war.
But no one is saying that he will end this war. I'll say it again. Why do you interpret these ceasefire agreements as the end of the war? It could just be preparation. It could be preparation, rearmament, let's say retraining of their reserves, and preparation for new offensives, and not necessarily even in Ukraine. The risk of war with NATO is increasing. This is evidenced by the fact that, look, during the war, he started building a new military base on the border with Finland. Well, it's not exactly on the border, but near the border.
Nearby, yes.
So I'm talking about the base in BEREZOVETS. And he has enough resources to carry out large-scale, not local, but large-scale sabotage operations. Just today, information came in that yet another round of sabotage actions was being prepared on planes with postal shipments. Poland has already officially accused Russian intelligence of setting fire to a shopping center in May 2024. It happened exactly a year ago. That's it. And there is one person wanted in connection with that. In Britain, a verdict was handed down to an entire Russian GRU agent network, which mostly included Bulgarian citizens who were involved and who planned sabotage actions, including assassinations. They simply didn't have time to carry all of this out to the end, but they were planning it. And look, even in a state of war, when he is fully involved and all his thoughts are here in Ukraine, he still has enough resources and time to carry out these serious operations. These are major operations, and expensive ones at that, on the territory of other third countries. That's why I say again that the current pause with Ukraine could be used to prepare an attack on other countries. And ahead of us, let's not forget, are the large-scale Russian-Belarusian exercises Zapad 2025, which will once again take place in close proximity to the borders of Poland and Lithuania.